Hey, Jamie, what's going on?
Morning, Ben. How's it going?
Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I know you're here somewhat against your will, but appreciate
Just a little
more exposure from TLC. It's nice having a new face from the Logistix company on here.
Yeah.
Your very first ever podcast. You've done a podcast before?
First ever podcast.
Beautiful. Thank you for taking some time and joining this morning. I know we've had Joe Hasenfratz on a couple past episodes, but obviously your first time coming over from TLC. So maybe just to kick it off, I want to give a little background on yourself and your role at TLC, and maybe a little intro on TLC as well if someone hasn't seen some of the past episodes.
Yeah. So I'm Jamie. I work at the Logistix company. We're a third-party logistics freight brokerage. We handle, truckload shipments, LTL shipments, international ocean freight, rail cars, transloading, packaging. We kind of do
A little bit of everything.
Yeah, a little bit of everything there is. Handle some of the worst commodities there are in terms of hazardous shipments and things, and some food grade type stuff.
Sure.
We really do a little bit of everything.
Sure.
I've been with the company for 4 years now, and primarily manage the rail shipments, the rail fleet, our packaging operations, our transload operations, and a lot of the project type things we work on.
So all the most tedious and kind of difficult things to work on, basically.
I view it as the most fun, but
yeah,
that's
the spin you need on it. That's the spin you need. But yeah, again, thank you for taking some time. Always nice having, a dedicated freight part on the podcast. I think people appreciate some of the more in-depth insights versus what, we're able to provide on the TCC side. Jumping right into it, I think coming into the four kind of core categories that TLC focuses on, obviously one of them is international freight, as you mentioned. So importing, exporting, kind of status of moving freight around the ports, obviously has been a big contentious thing the last 6 months, 12 months. There's obviously been a lot going on with the ports, but maybe since New Year's or so over the past couple weeks, how's the situation been with either importing, exporting, moving around the ports?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been, obviously, as I think a lot of people are aware of, even outside the industry now, the general supply chain issues across the world have been difficult for the last few months. And right now, I would say that the ports in general, we're still seeing a lot of congestion. We're still seeing a lot of issues with getting containers out of ports on time, and a lot of issues with containers going back into, to be returned overseas. There's basically a stockpiling of empty containers in storage depots near the ports.
Sure.
That's causing, just the trickle down effect onto loaded shipments getting delivered because you have no place to send the empty.
Yeah. Any ports worse than others, or is it kind of a consistent congestion really across the board in the U.S.?
I would say right now it's really just a consistent congestion across the board. You do, it ebbs and flows. Some days, different ports might be better than others, but overall, it's the entire country.
Just general congestion.
Yeah.
And I think we've talked in the past in some of our other meetings on the best recommendation you can kind of give is just to make sure your freight's as close to the end destination as it can be, using different ports in the U.S. based on where it actually needs to end up. That's still kind of the overwhelming advice that you give to somebody. Yeah,
definitely. Long haul shipments are more and more becoming a thing of the past at this point.
Yep.
And especially when it comes to importing and exporting, you really want to get to, even if it's not an ocean port, if you can get it to a rail yard, if you can get it to the closest, they call them inland ports.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a big rail terminal. They bring all the containers in directly from the ships and then, get them into middle of America, wherever it needs to go.
Sure.
And that's the best way to do it.
And you mentioned the long haul piece. That's kind of a nice segment right into the truck freight piece of this. Obviously, liquid bulk trucks or full dry vans. How has that been? And you mentioned the long haul thing. I think we've talked recently like that. What is considered a long haul seems to have kind of decreased a little bit. But maybe, I don't know. You obviously know better than I do. But what used to be considered a long haul was X miles. Now it's less so, and it's difficult finding trucks to go anywhere above that threshold.
Yeah, I would say there isn't a consistent threshold. It really depends on what you're shipping. So liquid bulk might be different from drayage. Drayage might be different from regular dry vans. LTL obviously is easy just the way it's set up.
Yep.
It has its own struggles, but nothing really distance-wise.
Yep.
Drayage, you're really looking at anything over maybe 300 miles is deemed a long haul at this point. Liquid bulk, anything over like a day and a half transit.
Okay.
Which is somewhere around 700 miles.
Okay.
And, dry vans, you really run into issues when you're, talking about 3 days. So just estimate like 500 miles a day.
So like on the liquid bulk, say you had to move a load from A to B, that's going to take 3 days. How do you do that? You have to look at intermodal. Is it just a smaller pool of drivers that are willing to go that far? What's the recommendation for some of those historical kind of long haul ranges?
So overall, I would say it's just a smaller pool. What some companies are looking at doing, and it has varying degrees of effectiveness right now, is what they call daisy chaining trailers along, which is they'll just use a pool of short haul drivers, and they will have basically a different driver will pick it up than will deliver it. They'll move it between their own terminals and their own yards, and they will, pick up, drop it at terminal X, have someone move it to terminal Y, and then deliver from there.
Which obviously adds some intricacies with potential delays and confusion and whatnot.
Yeah, there's definitely more potential for delays, especially as people are, kind of piloting it.
Yep.
But it does have if they can get it to work, it's a more consistent effect.
Sure. Maybe, I guess, a good example of getting a little bit more creative with supply chains and trying to make it work with what we're given here.
Yeah, it's really, the name of the game right now is really all about flexibility in the supply chain. Flexibility on carriers' parts, flexibility with shippers, flexibility with receivers. It's really an all-encompassing thing right now.
And you mentioned the LTL piece a bit too. Obviously, that's a very unique supply chain in itself with varying LTL deliveries. I know obviously TLC manages a significant number of LTL lanes and warehousing and things like that. So how's the general kind of LTL landscape been recently?
Well, LTL is, as we always say, it's always fun. You get, because of...
That's a nice positive spin.
Yeah. Because of, how it works with so many people touching it, you very often have delays in those. You very often have paperwork issues. LTL going like cross-border, for instance, is always delayed by 2 days maybe, crossing the border. And it's just, you have to remember, if you're a shipper, if you're a receiver, the odds of your paperwork, if it's not in a pouch attached to a pallet, for instance, the odds of your paperwork getting through with that bill of lading, anything else, to the end receiver is so limited at this point. So it's, if you're sending customs documents, if you're sending a certificate of analysis, if anything like that, it needs to be in the pouch, emailed to whoever it needs to get to.
Now,
That's the best way.
Would you go so far as to recommend customers look at more full truckload type of deliveries? If, say, you use 5 pallets a month, taking 20 at a time versus doing 5 a month, or was it not that far? It just kind of has its own intricacies. What would you recommend on the LTL side?
I would say they both have their own intricacies. Definitely, if you get to volumes that it makes sense for your company, if it's something where you can manage it, if it's, say, 4 pallets every 4 months or something, and it's pretty rateable at that, then that might be a good option for you. But the biggest issue is when you get into what's called the volume LTLs. Those are the hardest. When you're only trying to move, it's usually over 10,000 pounds. So if you're trying to move, say, 6 pallets at a time, that is a difficult number to move. Just because you end up with so much more space taken up on an LTL trailer, and then they're trying to match that up on the back end with other things that fit with that. And it's just, you're better off either going 2 or 3, 4 pallets maybe, or with the truckload, as you mentioned.
So that's a good kind of basis that we haven't really talked about in the past, but a true LTL shipment, I guess, is call it less than 5 pallets. Once you kind of get above that, you might start looking at full container loads or dedicated trucks and things like that.
There's definitely a sweet spot of like 5 pallets or less that's LTL. And then once you get over that, then you start getting into the volume truckload part, which is difficult. And then really once you get to 20,000 pounds anyways, you get to requiring a full truckload. So I would say if you can steer yourself out of that volume section as much as possible, that's probably where you'll have the best success.
Interesting. Learn something new every day. And your bread and butter, kind of to wrap this up, is obviously the rail piece of it. I know early on in COVID, when trucking was really, really delayed and COVID was an issue with truckers, not that it's not today, but when it really became an issue kind of right when COVID started, a lot of recommendations were pushing towards intermodal and rail as kind of an alternative source. And I think that very quickly got backed up and kind of bogged down a bit. But what's the kind of general status of rail deliveries, both intermodal deliveries as well as dedicated, rail liquid tankers that I know we're doing a lot of?
I would say that rail right now is about as congested as I've seen it.
Yeah.
So because of what you're talking about, that push to move everything by intermodal, and this is kind of what we see in supply chains in general, is when you have such a large push to move things to a different method of transportation, to a different source, then that then gets overwhelmed because you're shifting, all the extra volume onto that.
Sure.
So definitely intermodal shipments, we're seeing huge delays right now, especially going, those like cross-continent type shipments going, say, like Vancouver to Montreal, things like that, or Los Angeles to New Jersey.
Which is where people probably are looking at it because it
exactly
might make financial sense.
That is those are usually the best lanes for it. But right now, your shipment might roll by 2 weeks. You may have it loaded in a container, and that rail booking may get pushed out by 2 weeks.
Yep.
As far as rail in general, when it comes to transloading, liquid bulk, dry bulk, everything like that, and direct rail shipments, there are still definitely delays in, the car shipments themselves because, again, rail's just being pushed as an alternative, and it's a good one. But, yeah, there are still plenty of delays with just getting the trains moved, just due to the sheer volumes that are being moved right now. It is still, especially for long-haul shipments, I would still definitely recommend it, especially for liquid bulk. If you can pool, transloading, if you can pool enough orders together on the other end, if you can, if your customer, if they take as much volume as a rail car in a, decent amount of time within maybe a month,
sure,
then I would look for it.
Look at it.
That's 4 trucks,
right?
Usually,
right.
But I definitely keep looking at it.
Yeah. I think that's a great overview and everything kind of going on. Any final words of expertise or recommendations for anyone listening on the freight side, or, regardless whether you're looking at LTL or up to rail cars? Is it? I know we've kind of been pushing flexibility. Is that the key recommendation?
I would say for me, it's definitely try and be as flexible as you can, and plan out as much as you can. And planning out with the flexibility piece doesn't mean that everything's going to necessarily go as planned, but plan out with some flexibility if possible.
Yep.
And I guess definitely just understand as a whole that everyone's dealing with the same thing. If you're talking to trucking companies, if you're talking to shipping companies, trucking companies, whoever you're talking to, odds are they're just as frustrated with everything going on and trying to work their way through it as anyone else. Customers, receivers, shippers, truckers, it's frustrating for everyone right now.
Not just
so it's just something we always have to remind ourselves of. It's very important to remember that everyone's in it together at this point. So
awesome. Well, appreciate you taking the time. I think it was a good overview, good episode. Hopefully we'll have you on another episode here soon.
Yeah.
And we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Jamie.